if you're a fan and your number one worry all offseason gets confirmed in the worst possible way at the worst possible time, I think it's natural for fans to be like, well, that's it. They're never going to be able to turn this thing around.
Our friend Aaron Gleeman joining us right now from The Athletic, covers the Twins every day, which he's a champ for doing right now. And you can check out his show, Gleeman and the Geek. It's the best Twins pod out there. Aaron, great to see you. And dude, I got to admit, it's a car wreck right now, car crash that you just cannot look away from. I am more excited to watch a Twins game right now than any other game in baseball. I don't know what that says about me. Well, because, dude, this story is wild. So what are you seeing from a month ago to now?
I mean, injuries have been a part of it, obviously, but I think just the collapse of the pitching staff, and some of that is injuries within that too. But, I mean, the injuries really affected the lineup more, I would say, but now they have Correa back, Buxton back. They've actually both played pretty well in the limited games they played since returning. But since they basically lost Joe Ryan from the rotation early August, mid-August. They lost Brock Stewart from the bullpen right around the trade deadline. They've had to plug 3 rookies into the rotation behind Pablo Lopez and Bailey Ober, and just the weight of that, their mediocre performances, shorter starts, and then the bullpen being short, because right now, other than Griffin, Jackson, Cole Sands, and sometimes John Duran, they just don't have anybody they can trust in the bullpen, and so it's all just sort of cratered, and I think the bullpen especially has blown so many late leads over the last several weeks in some really just crushing spots. And, you know, you add in the Tigers just refusing to lose, basically, and that's where we're at.
Put your finger on it then. What is it? It's not like we're talking about, wow, you know, this team last year had a great bullpen, and now this season they're doing bad. We're talking about, like, 23 days ago. Like, what is the – is it a standard? Because I think it was 2 years ago, a Rocco Baldelli managed team had almost the same record, and they got exhausted. Gabe Kapler ran it kind of similar. They would win, and then get exhausted. Is this a Rocco Baldelli / front office analytic finger that is being pointed?
I mean, it's definitely similar to 2022. I would say that one around the same time, an even worse collapse. They completely fell out of the playoff picture. That one, I think, could be pinned almost entirely on injuries. I mean, by the time they got to like mid-September, they barely could put out a lineup out there, let alone a rotation and a bullpen. I think this one is only partly injuries. I think, you know, I was on here in, I don't know, April probably with you guys talking about the offseason and how ownership didn't spend any money and they slashed payroll by $30 million and they got off to a poor start. And the Twins recovered really nicely from that. But then, like you said, for the second time in 3 years, the bottom kind of fell out. I think a lot of it is they have a lot of injury-prone guys. I mean, Correa, Buxton, Lewis, some of the pitchers. And in years past, they've tried to build depth around those guys, knowing that, you know, Buxton might only play 100 games. Correa might only play 100-something games. Lewis, who knows what you're going to get. They weren't really able to do that this offseason because they slashed the payroll by $30 million from ownership. That's not necessarily the front office's fault. It forced the front office to go shopping in kind of the discount bin even more so than they usually do. And almost every bullpen or even rotation move that they made, and these were low wattage moves. These were signing guys for $1 million, $2 million, getting guys, you know, Anthony DeSclafani or something as a toss into a trade. But they're basically 0 for 5 or 6 of those. All of them whiffed. None of them are even on the September roster. 4, I think, out of the 6 pitchers they brought in have been cut. 2 of them haven't thrown a pitch because they've been injured. And I think what you're left with, especially on the pitching side, is just guys in roles that no one wanted them to be in. It's not that they maybe don't have future promise, but they didn't envision, you know, David Festa, Simeon Woods Richardson, and Zebby Matthews being 60% of the rotation down the stretch. And then beyond the 2 or 3 veteran guys that they can count on in the bullpen, they're just tossing guys out there that have no experience in this role, don't even necessarily really have a ton of upside. They're just sort of placeholders because they don't have much else.
All right, I know the sky's falling everywhere around Minnesota right now. I still believe they're going to make the playoffs. And we have to be – I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what is this team going to do in the playoffs? What are they going to do? Because teams are made with – or playoff teams are made with Two really good starters. Pablo Lopez has been awesome. Bailey Ober last night is like his third out of 5 starts where he has 10 plus strikeouts. And then you said they have 3 bullpen pieces. Texas Rangers had 3 bullpen pieces last year, and they won with essentially 3 starters. So I guess you need someone else to step up, Simeon Woods Richardson. But when they make the playoffs, because I believe they're still going to hold off the Tigers, how does this team win?
I mean, I think you did sort of map it out. I think Lopez and Ober are certainly a front two that you can lean on in the playoffs. They do. I think it would be great if Duran in the bullpen was the Duran from last year or 2 years ago, where he was truly dominant. His strikeout rate's down. His velocity's been down all season. You know, it sounds silly to say a guy only throws 101, but when you're throwing 101 instead of 103, 104, it does make a little bit of a difference. He's just been good rather than great. Jackson Sands have been great. So like you said, they do have 2.5, 3 relievers they can count on. They have 2 starters they can count on. But the problem I think they're going to run into is even if, like you, and the playoff odds also paint them as, 55, 60% still to make the playoffs, even if you believe in that, they're going to have to win games in the final weekend. They play the Orioles at home in Minnesota because the Tigers are playing the White Sox. And I don't think you can really count on the White Sox to offer much help there. So you're going to need to start Pablo Lopez and also maybe Bailey Ober in that Friday, Saturday, Sunday series against Baltimore just to get into the playoffs. And depending how they line that up, you might not be able to go with Lopez in game 1. You might not even be able to go with Ober or either of those guys in the first 2 games. And if they can't lean on those guys to give them, let's say, 6 strong innings in the playoffs, which Lopez did great twice last year, including a huge win in Houston. If you can't count on those 2 guys, they just have no one that can even be counted on to go 5 innings. And then you get into that middle of the bullpen, which is just the soft underbelly, and they just don't have anything you can count on. And also, I've talked a lot about the pitching here. The lineup has been pretty mediocre here for about 2 months. Now, the hope is once you get Buxton and Correa rolling, which they look pretty good so far, that maybe Royce Lewis can turn it on. And you do have the pieces healthy to have a good, productive lineup like we saw in the second half of last year. They just haven't done it yet.
All right, Aaron, I have 2 questions for you. First one is, we talked about this a little bit. Manny Margot is 0 for 29 pinch hitting. Is Rocco Baldelli just going to continue to play the matchups, even if the numbers don't say it's right? And after you answer that, then I have another question for you.
I mean, I think at this point, maybe he just wants to set the record. He wants to be the guy who made it happen. He did say last night, I'm not on the road trip, so I wasn't there to hear this, but I saw a quote. Baldelli said, well, at some point, and we've probably reached that point, the numbers are sort of overwhelming. And so you probably won't see Margot pinch hit that much. The weird thing with Margot, though, is he hasn't been good overall. He has been underwhelming offensively. He's been way worse than I expected defensively. But when he starts games, often like today in the leadoff spot against the lefty, he's been really productive. When he comes off the bench, again, often against the lefty, because that's, like you said, the matchups that they try to put him in as a right-handed hitter, he's just been a complete zero. So it does hurt them a lot because, as you hinted at, the Twins like to platoon. They like to do mid-game kind of line changes, hockey style, where, you go from a righty to a lefty on the mound. All of a sudden, 3 guys come off the bench. When you have a guy who's 0 for 29 and he's had 34 plate appearances without a hit, he has drawn 5 walks. I'll give him credit for that. It does alter sort of your mindset there. And I think we have seen guys like Matt Wallner, who's a left-handed hitter, who normally earlier in the season would be pinch hit for in every situation. It's been more of a 50-50 thing where they've let the young left-handed hitters have a few more at-bats, in part because they've earned it, but in part because, at some point, even if you believe in the long-term look and the track record, a guy who's 0 for 29 coming off the bench, that kind of screams maybe make adjustments.
Yeah, that's the definition of insanity right there. And we're at the last week of the season. So my follow-up here is, who is to blame for something like that the other day? I know it's just plug and play. We're taking out Wallner. We're doing the platoon. But 0 for 29 is enough for me. I was like Uncle at 0 for 15. I'm not saying he never gets to pinch hit again. But and maybe this is not something that's part of the game plan, the script, whatever you want to call it. But I just don't understand how this happens. Clearly, there is a player who is a human being who is telling you that when I enter games for these spots, it's not working for me. So I don't understand. Like, has this been quizzed to the front office as well? Because I'm sure they're a part of this where they discuss and go, are we going to put him in these spots still? And they say, Yep, let's keep trying it.
Yeah, I mean, it's Baldelli making the moves. I don't want to suggest that like the front office is making the call on this stuff, but if you go back to the offseason or spring training, I guess, when they acquired Margot, what they envisioned for him in terms of a role, they've stuck with his usage. He's going to end up with well over 100 games played, but he hasn't really warranted that. Even setting aside the pinch hitting, he just hasn't been all that productive. He's really struggled like an odd amount, I would say, defensively for a guy who shouldn't be, wearing down that much because he's still in his 20s. I think in that spot, certainly Twins fans at this point are wanting to see the young lefties like Wallner. What do you have to lose with letting those guys have the plate appearance against the lefty on lefty matchup, even if it's not a great matchup? Your point about it being a human being, I mean, there's a thing analytically called a pinch hitter penalty, which is basically if you think a guy's a 250 hitter in general, if you bring him in off the bench as a pinch hitter, he loses, 10 or 15, 20% of that production just because he's coming in cold. He hasn't seen any pitches, all that stuff. Well, it can, if that's the average, if the average pinch hitter loses, let's say 15, 20%, that means there are some guys who don't lose anything when they come off the bench as a pinch hitter, Lenny Harris or whoever. And then there are some guys who lose everything when they come off the bench as a pinch hitter. And I think you would have to point to Margot as someone like that. They don't have a ton of great other options other than just saying Julian's going to hit for himself, Larnick's going to hit for himself, Wallner's going to hit for himself. All these young lefties are going to hit for themselves. I just think it's something that is ingrained in them. That's the position they take, is to platoon and play matchups. And I agree with you that once you get to mid-September, it's kind of time to throw that out the window. But I suspect that Baldelli and the front office's position on it is, well, why would we change anything just for the last 10 days of the season, right or wrong?
Agreed. All right, so let me ask you this. What's the panic meter in Minnesota? With 9 games left, you basically have a 2-game lead. Is it high? Because I still think you're going to make it. So is the fan panic meter high? Is it higher within the Twins fans or the Twins front office / I know they're never going to let you onto it, but who has the highest panic meter right now?
I mean, you can definitely sense the stress with Baldelli, who he held a closed-door meeting a week ago and read everybody the riot act, which is not normally his personality. He's more of a zen, calm approach, but he's tried to veer from that a little bit. I think there's been some, subtle complaints from players and stuff like that, but it's the fan. I mean, the fan base, like I said, we talked in April. We talked maybe during the offseason too. The fan base was prepared for this exact thing to happen, which is if you don't bring in reinforcements for the pitching, especially, but just overall depth for the team, and you slash 20%, $30 million off the payroll, you're trying to lean on guys like DeSclafani and Paddock and then rookies in the rotation. Every fan who was paying any attention was all worked up about the payroll all offseason, and they were underwhelmed by all the front office's move because that was attached to the lower payroll. They just didn't have any options. And the big fear that whole time was, well, even if they're playing pretty well in the first half, they're going to get to the stretch run, August and especially September, and they're just going to run out of gas. They're just going to run out of healthy arms. They can't afford to lose one or two top guys to an injury. And unfortunately, that is exactly what has happened. And so I think from a fan base perspective, if you're a fan and your number one worry all offseason gets confirmed in the worst possible way at the worst possible time, I think it's natural for fans to be like, well, that's it. They're never going to be able to turn this thing around. But realistically, like you guys have said, I would say they're still at worst probably a coin flip to make the playoffs. And I mean, there are scenarios where if Detroit just refuses to lose, they might pass Kansas City, and then the Twins could potentially pass Kansas City as well because they have the tiebreaker over Detroit and over Kansas City and over Seattle for that matter too, who's behind them. But I think probably the fan reaction is that this thing's over and they've already completed the collapse, and we can move on to complaining about next offseason and the payroll. But I do think realistically they have it in them to turn things around. They have a series against the Marlins to begin next week at home that you should be able to take 2 out of 3 there at least. And if they play well in the final weekend of the season against the Orioles, I do think they have the ability to at least kind of stumble into the playoffs still.
Pop quiz, AJ. What is America's #1 meal kit?
That would be HelloFresh, Scott, and it even works for picky eaters like you. There's an ever-changing menu of 50 recipes to choose from each week. So just select your meals and delivery date, and voila!
Yeah, home-cooked meals just hit different. The recipes are easy to follow with pre-portioned ingredients delivered fresh. Just choose that delivery day, open your box, cook, and eat. It's so easy, Kratz.
Agreed. With FT every day and my coaching job, I don't have time to search recipes all night, and also spending money on a whole jar of spices for only a pinch? Nah, I'm good. My family gets more of me because I don't have to take a last-minute trip to the grocery store at night to find dinner.
Ready for this? For free breakfast for life, go to HelloFresh.com/free FT. One free breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/FREEFT.
Aaron, I want you to look into the camera like you're looking into all the fans. Your writing is your connection for baseball fans in Minnesota to this team. You said something earlier. You said, well, it's not like the front office is making these moves. It's totally Rocco Baldelli.
Well, here's what I'll say.
Okay.
I get that that's the perception, and obviously the Twins aren't the only team for whom that's the perception of. And I think there are big picture things, definitely, that the front office is dictating. But I've never gotten the sense, talking to Baldelli, talking to his coaches, talking to the front office guys, on the record, off the record, just casually, whatever, that they are truly dictating, bring this pitcher in for the 6th inning, pinch hit this guy in the 7th inning, or even day-to-day lineups. Now, maybe I'm just wrong about that. And I know that's the fear that a lot of people have with analytically oriented front offices. And I know in general, managers just have a lot less pull maybe than they did 20 years ago. But I think certainly they're all on the same page, or Baldelli has gotten on the same page of an overall strategy that involves pinch hitting in the middle of the games, that involves certain bullpen usage, that involves platooning in the starting lineups. And, ultimately that's what's leading to these decisions. But I just think the specific, individual, why did they pinch hit Margot for Wallner in that one at bat? That's Baldelli. Now, is it Baldelli in tandem with the front office as an understanding of this is what we do? Oh, absolutely. But I don't think he's being pressured like in the moment in games. I think even the Twins, as analytically oriented as they are and new school as they are, I think they would kind of shy away from that. Because, I think, look, I'm an analytically oriented writer. I even think that would be a huge mistake. And so I don't think they're doing that.
If you were to ask Rocco Baldelli to his face, do you get text messages during the game on what moves to make? Could he say
during the game? You can't get text during the game.
You're right. You can't get text.
You can't do that. But before the game too, even for playing by the rules, before the game, like some front offices script like crazy, right? Like you said, every front office has a say nowadays at the very 100%. Least. They send information, they make recommendations.
They even make the lineup.
Yep. Right? Many of them, most of them, I would say at this point. So there is say. Anyone that says, the manager does everything, they're flat out lying. That's just not true.
Anybody who says the front office isn't sending down messages during the game is flat out not been in the dugout.
Yeah.
Unless they've completely changed it. And I think they've gone more over the analytics side. I've never been with the Twins organization, but it would be a legitimate off the record question for you to ask, Mr. Baldelli.
Well, and really, if they're kind of, like Scott said, scripting stuff out. They certainly script the bullpen usage out. They say who's fresh today, who's available for 2 innings today. If we can get through 5, this is what we want to do. And so I have no doubt that they're looking into the bullpen and looking at the lineup that they've laid out, sometimes intentionally. Sometimes Baldelli will put, 2 lefties back to back because he knows come the 6th inning, the opposing manager is going to bring in a lefty reliever, and then they can unload all the pinch hitters off the bench. They certainly script it out to that extent. And so really it's kind of semantic to say, are they sending a smoke signal in the 6th inning so that the manager knows it, or has the manager just sort of already figured out going into the game that, hey, if this plays out the way we think it will, here's the button I'm probably going to press or the string I'm probably going to pull. So, I do think that goes on with the Twins for sure. But I also, like you guys were saying, I don't think that's that unique among the other 29 teams in baseball in 2024.
Okay, so last one here. Not going to crap on the budget, and we do plenty of that. We'll do plenty of that in the offseason too. I'm going to take a different turn. We anticipated this could be a problem, and I'm saying we as in baseball people, you for sure, fans, basically everyone, right? And it happened. So let's go back for a moment to the trade deadline. Should the front office have left room to spend? If you are given a mandate from ownership to cut payroll like they did, whatever it was. What was it, 30, 40 mil over the offseason?
30 something million, yeah.
30 something million. I would say, okay, what am I working with this year? What's my number? It's 140? Okay, cool. Let's get to 128 or 132, whatever the number is, so that we have room to work with at the trade deadline. Because that is one spot where it will cost you prospects, but you can get big name players for the rest of their season. And it is a way to curb your budget issues, if you know what I'm saying. They did zero at the deadline for a second consecutive year. How many teams do absolutely zero, not one thing, to shore up their ball club and win a World Series? Almost never happens. So is it cockiness that they felt like they were the perfect team? Because I'm going to put a little bit of this on the front office. I know that if they had a conversation with their ownership group and they said, this is your number, and they said, hey, well, in order for us to win, we need some leeway here. So let's cut a little bit more so we can make deals. So who's to blame here? Are they prospect hugging? Did they not lay out what a payroll should look like? Because I heard that if they wanted to take anyone on, they had to have the other team eat the money, which that's a joke. They're going to hang up on you. Oh, you want to eat Kikuchi's money? I've got 8 phone calls about him. Like, shove it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do prospect hug a little bit. I think most mid or low level payroll teams will prospect hug. The Twins have always done that. And then I think they ran into what you described, which is other than taking on, $1 million, let's say at the deadline, they were going to need a selling team to eat some money, which is going to just end up costing you more prospect capital anyway. I think the two things you brought up are absolutely fair. One, maybe hold back $2 million to make a move at the deadline. And you might say, well, then you wouldn't have added so-and-so coming into the season. But like I said, they went over on all of their pitching moves coming into the season anyway. And they weren't expensive moves, but it wouldn't have hurt them to, not sign Jay Jackson or Josh Staumont or not trade for Anthony DeSclafani, on and on and on. So they could have done that. But, you said you didn't want to rip the payroll stuff. I'll rip the payroll stuff. I mean, why not? I think it is silly and misguided, and I'll say like pathetic, that a team that on July 30th was absolutely in the mix for the division and certainly had a really good shot to make the playoffs, that ownership doesn't just say, okay, add $2 million, add $3 million. And to your point, if you add $3 million at the deadline, you're roughly adding $10 million in salary. And no one was asking them to go trade for some, high-end guy. I think Kikuchi would have been great, obviously, but they realistically could have brought in, a number 4 starter and a secondary setup man, and it would have addressed a lot of their issues. I think it would have at least halted some of this, complete collapse that they've had, just because they would have had 1 or 2 more veteran pieces there that at least have been here and could provide some, even mediocre pitching in key spots would have been huge for them. So in terms of who the blame goes to, I mean, first of all, the blame a lot of the time goes to the players. They haven't pitched well, other than like Pablo Lopez and Cole Sands and a couple other guys. They've pitched horribly for like a month and a half. I think a lot of the blame goes to the front office because, like I said, they brought in 5 or 6 pitching additions, a handful of relievers, a couple of start. None of them panned out. And I don't just mean they were mediocre. I mean they were bad or injured and got cut before even the trade deadline. But I do think a lot of the weight or a lot of the blame needs to go to ownership, because when you take a mid-payroll team that had like a $150 million payroll and had plenty of holes coming into the offseason, like you said, this wasn't some perfect team on paper, and you slash it by $30 million, you're just handcuffing their ability to make any of these moves, and you're forcing them to go, well, do we want to save this $2 million for the deadline? And whether or not you think they should have done that, I think bigger picture, it is just pathetic and frustrating and disappointing for a fan base, certainly, that the ownership group didn't just say, all right, I know we slash payroll, but things are going pretty well. Let's at least bring in 1 or 2 pieces here that aren't going to cost a lot. They can be impending free agents to shore up a couple of these holes. And they didn't do that. And the holes got bigger, and now they're just leaking everywhere. And it's too late to do anything, obviously. And my big fear is in the offseason, I don't know that the payroll is going to even stay the same. It's certainly not going to go up. So we might be having the same type of conversation all winter too.
Yeah, they might say, oh, that was our winning window. Now we'll kind of start to build ourselves back up again. I'm telling you, dude, just for the record, I annihilate the payroll in the way that they've managed this operation over the last year and a half. You made the playoffs. You haven't had playoff success in a long time. City's vibing. The playoff atmosphere there was insane. You think you're going to add a little more to that and maybe win a World Series, right? And go deeper, at least in the playoffs. And they just punched and punched and punched their fan base in the mouth and they're reacting right now. My only point was we get critics sometimes, fans going, well, you can't change that and you can't just keep talking about it. Fine. You have to, whatever, the cards dealt to you, you have to play that out, right? So my point was, you don't know what your problems are going to be halfway through the year. Do you take a little bit of risk on the front end and say, hey, let's see what our problems are at the deadline and have that leeway? Because we know we're being screwed by the top, but can we negotiate some extra money here to work with at the deadline instead of at the front of the year? That was my point there, where I'm like, hey, if this is going to be your problem, you need to adjust as an operation and make sure that you don't have a shutout trade deadline. No team's winning on a shutout trade deadline. You can't.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. And like I said, I mean, multiple things can be true. There are multiple places that you can point plenty of blame here for this thing. This is when you have a collapse like this for the second time in 3 years, there's all kinds of blame, no shortage. And so I think it starts with the ownership and the payroll drop, but then even within those obstacles that were placed in front of the front office. And I do think those played a huge part. I think they pursued low-end guys that they wouldn't have even bothered with just because that's all the budget room they had. And so within that, though, you can't strike out on all 5 or all 6 or all 7 of them. And then once you do get to the deadline, you have to find a way to be creative enough. I mean, look, more than a dozen decent relievers got moved, right? Not all of them had huge contracts. Not all of them required, top 100 prospects. There was a way to get creative and at least add some reinforcements to a pitching staff that absolutely, I mean, leading up to the deadline, it was no surprise that they needed pitching help. And so to not do it after the offseason they had, and like you said, it's almost as if they went out and tried to lower fan morale as far and as quickly as possible coming off last October, which was amazing at Target Field. And now we're sitting here and fans are going, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. And even if they do, who cares? They don't have the horses to get it done. I would, kind of pull back from that a little bit. I still think they're about a coin flip to make the playoffs. And I think if you can get into a series where you have Pablo Lopez and Bailey Ober starting the first 2 games, you still have a puncher's chance. But yeah, so much about this on the field and off the field has been just hugely disappointing.
Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. Enjoy the World Series. It's going to be great. You're going to be there.
Stop it.
Our whole diatribe here.
Yeah.
Just
they're going to clone Pablo Lopez into 5 starters.
Enjoy the cold weather in Minnesota with no dome at the end of October. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah. Let's do a live show at the parade for the World Series right in downtown Minneapolis. And then we can just pretend like we never said all this doom and gloom stuff and we were right all along.
Yep. I'll be at, what's the pole ads? Is that who the
Yeah.
I'll be on the float behind the pole ads. Picking up money.
Sounds good.
Picking up money as it's falling out of their pockets because they're going to be just taking it to the bank.
Better buy them a sandwich because times are tight, I heard out there. Aaron, this was awesome, dude. Thanks for the catch up, and we'll see what happens the next week and change. I'm sure we'll catch in the off season. Everyone follow Aaron Gleeman. That's the name on Twitter. Check out the articles, the podcast as well. Appreciate you, man.
Anytime, boys. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.